20 years ago this year, Laurie Halse Anderson's breakout novel, Speak, rocked the world of teenagers across the country. The book centers on Melinda, a girl who stopped speaking after a sexual assault. The book has been praised and censored alike, and launched Halse Anderson into a career of communicating honestly and openly about consent and sexual violence. Now Halse Anderson has written a new book, Shout, which continues the dialogue on these vital topics.
I think we can call them sister books because they definitely share the same DNA, but were written at different times and for different purposes.
That's Halse Anderson.
When Speak was published in 1999, I began to receive invitations to talk to high school students because the book was quickly adopted into curriculum across the country. And as I spoke to those students, originally, I thought I was there to talk about the literature and the writing process. But I quickly figured out that what the students really needed was somebody to speak honestly with them about sexual violence, about what consent was, what that looked like and sounded like. And I needed to be clear with them about what my real experience was. Speak is based in my emotional truth, although the details are different. I was raped when I was 13 years old, and I didn't tell anybody for 23 years. And like many survivors of sexual assault, that silencing was devastating, and the attack was devastating, the trauma. When I came out of that, after I got some therapy at the end of those 23 years, that's when I wrote Speak. So I've been telling these stories that are in Shout to high school students across the country for 20 years now. The reason that I call Speak and Shout sister books is that Speak is a fictionalized version of what I went through. Shout is not only my truth, but it's also the truth that I've heard from thousands of survivors who've been through this too.
Halse Anderson says a part of why she decided to put these stories down in print was to give an answer to some of the questions she has been asked over and over again by high school students for decades.
The thing that shocked me the most was the questions that I was getting from teenage boys who had read the book in class. The boys said, "I don't understand, Miss. Why is the main character in the book, the girl who had been raped, why is she so upset for the whole book? It's like 9 months." And their reasoning was that the act of the rape itself didn't take very long, so why would she still be upset months later? The first couple of times I heard that, I was shocked, and I kind of wanted to ask those teenage boys for their mom's phone number because I wanted to have a conversation with her. But then I realized that I had to stop my judgment and listen and find out exactly why they were asking that question. And it's simple. We still don't have a generation of parents who are comfortable talking to their kids about healthy sexuality. Parents don't really talk to their kids about what consent is. Everybody keeps clinging to the wrong and outdated notion that rapists are the bad guys in the bushes with a gun, when in fact, if you're in high school, if you're under age 18, you know your attacker in 93% of the cases.
While she says she was surprised by some of these basic questions coming from so many young men, she says generally the young women in the audience understood what she was talking about all too well.
The gulf between the understanding of the impact of sexual assault between those genders it was the Grand Canyon. So there's a real need to facilitate conversations, I think, with groups of adolescents, boys, girls, and all the people who identify outside that binary. But more often than not, the girls asked questions that made it very, very clear that they had been through this. I've never given a presentation in 20 years at schools, libraries, bookstores, colleges, where I haven't had at least one person come up to me after the presentation in tears. I think that sexual violence is way more common than anybody realizes.
Of course, our understanding of how widespread sexual violence is has grown over the past few years, with the Me Too movement gaining steam and dominating headlines.
And it wasn't the Me Too movement growing that made me want to write this book. It was the backlash, the misogynist backlash, and the people who still believe the old rape mythologies and believe you can't be a good person and have raped somebody. Look at this guy. He's a pillar of the community. He's all these great things. He's not the bad guy in the alley with a gun. So it was the backlash that made it clear to me that we need to be sharing more information. We need to help survivors find the language. That's one of the things about being silenced and being shamed. You often don't have the words. You don't know how to talk about what happened to you. And you don't think anybody will believe you. You feel very, very alone.
So in an effort to set the record straight, fight against victim shaming, and get everyone on the same page, Halse Anderson shares some statistics that shed light on how damaging sexual violence can be on an individual.
Approximately 92% of women who are raped will be experiencing symptoms of PTSD within 2 weeks. I think the science tells us it's somewhere between 40% of those women will be experiencing symptoms of PTSD 20 years later. So for me, when I was 13, I didn't tell anybody for a number of reasons. The biggest one was I was afraid my father would hunt the boy down and shoot him. And trauma sometimes can take a long time to even talk about. It's very common to take 20 to 30 years. The reason I finally went and got help at a therapist is that I realized that my own depression and PTSD that I developed after the attack, I realized it was interfering with my ability to be a good mother. So I didn't even do it for myself, but I was able to do it for my girls.
Halse Anderson says that while this discomfort parents feel about discussing rape and consent to their children is understandable, it is also untenable.
But what I like to point to when I'm talking to groups of parents is when our children are small, we put a lot of energy into teaching them how to cross the road, right? And there's constant lessons and constant reinforcement of those lessons. And then as they get a little bit older and they're getting ready to drive, we spend even more time trying to teach them what the rules are, the safety, that what do you look out for. We send them to special classes, and then we get really nervous. We need to have that same kind of consistent, loving attention to issues revolving around healthy sexuality and consent. I have 6 grandsons, all under the age of 6. We start teaching consent when they're 2, when they have language. You don't touch somebody without their permission. That's consent at the most basic level.
And yes, Halse Anderson does have some advice for how to broach these sensitive topics.
So here's what we all have to do. We're going to take a deep breath and recognize that we're going to try our best. And what I've learned is that when I kick off conversations that are challenging like this, I always start by saying, man, does this feel awkward? Owning what you're feeling and owning, your hopes for a conversation is a great way. And if you say, I'm feeling really awkward, then you're giving permission for the other people in the conversation to go, oh gosh, so am I. I don't even know how to begin this. And as we have more and more of these conversations, though, we will get better at choosing and knowing the right words.
For the past few years, we have heard so many stories of abusive behavior by people in positions of power. But Halse Anderson says our reckoning won't be finished until we've heard every story that a victim wants to share.
One of the unexpected things that has happened in 20 years is the mail that I get from people in their 60s, 70s, and a couple occasions in their 80s. And they write to tell me about what happened to them because they've been victims of sexual violence too. And if it's hard for people to talk about it now, you better believe it was hard to talk about it in 1952. So here's my secret hope for Shout. And that is, as the book comes out, we've got Mother's Day and Father's Day coming up, that people will share it with their older relatives, their parents, their grandparents, their aunties and uncles, and just open the door to see if they want to have conversations.
Halse Anderson's books, Speak and Shout, are both available now. For more information on all of our guests, visit our site, viewpointsonline.net. You can find an archive of past programs there and on iTunes and Stitcher. I'm Gary Price.
Access to a bank account is critical for managing daily money needs, paying bills, and getting paid. But more than 8 million households in the U.S. lack access to one. That's why Chase has introduced Chase Secure Banking, a new low-fee bank account with no overdraft fees and all the benefits of banking. Here's Chase financial health expert Alice Rodriguez.
Access to a bank account is an important step in building financial health. Some consumers may be paying hundreds a year in alternative services like check cashing or money orders And secure banking gives them the option to make the most of their hard-earned money.
Chase Secure Banking has a low monthly fee of $4.95 and provides a debit card you can use nearly everywhere cards are accepted, in addition to electronic payments, free full access to Chase branches and ATMs, the Chase mobile app, full support from bankers in person, and no overdraft fees. Find out more at chase.com/securebanking.
Paid non-attorney spokesperson Fierce Nakawati with principal office in Dallas, Texas. Attention landscapers and anyone working in the landscape industry. This is an important alert for users of the weed killer Roundup that have been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. A California jury recently awarded $289 million to a landscaper who claimed Roundup gave him cancer. Roundup is the most widely used herbicide in the United States with billions of pounds applied each year. Farm workers and landscapers are at the highest risk of injury from exposure. Time is limited to file a claim. If you work with Roundup weed killer and were diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, don't wait. Call the Roundup Legal Helpline now. The number to dial is 800-208-0501. That number again is 800-208-0501. You could be entitled to significant compensation. If you've been exposed to Roundup and have been diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, don't wait. Call the Roundup Legal Helpline right now. 800-208-0501. That's 800-208-0501. Again, 800-208-0501. Call now.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Viewpoints is a production of MediaTrax Communications. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook to learn about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on iTunes. Plus, you'll always find podcasts of our segments and information about our guests at viewpointsonline.net. Join us again next week for your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.